Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you again to each of you for joining today's session, our Business as Unusual webinar series, where we are speaking with badass industry leaders who are helping all of us thrive and survive in today's economic climate. My name is Lisa Baining. I'm one of Red Caffeine's account managers, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We are so excited to have our owner and principal, Kathy Steele of Red Caffeine, as well as Moisés Noreña, the VP of Innovation for
Hello.
Fortune Brands, and Moen, as our two featured guests today. And as we build today's session, we are going to take innovation beyond the buzzword that it is and really dig in to make sure it is a practical application that you can bring back to your company, to your role, and to your team. So get ready and get set to get some great info today. As a few housekeeping things, we do have all of our participants on mute, but this is an interactive session. So I encourage you, please use the chat function, use the QA option, or you can also go ahead and raise your hand in the session. If needed, we'll unmute people, but would love to get your questions that Moisés and Kathy can answer as we go through today's presentation. As another note as well, we continue to support our restaurant industry during these economic times as they have been so hard hit during the pandemic. So wanted to give a quick call out to Alex, Steve, Maggie, Michael, and Robin, who are the 5 winners of today's lunch. I know a few of them are still ordering, so we look forward to supporting your neighborhood businesses. So remember, if you're one of our first 5 registrants for a session, you automatically win a $20 voucher to have lunch at one of your neighborhood restaurants to continue supporting them. With all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started with today's session. So I would like to turn things over to Kathy and to Moisés.
Thanks, Lisa. Moisés, we're so thrilled to have you here today, and I can't wait to dig in. I poured through your bio. You've been an innovation leader in so many different, for so many cool companies like Allstate, and your current role at Moen and Whirlpool, but you've also been featured in some books. I'm familiar with the Midnight Lunch because we did some work with Sarah Caldecott with a couple of clients a few years back. So really excited to have you here today, but could you tell us a little bit more about your current role at Moen and what it means to be the VP of Innovation?
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And I always like to share my experiences, so thank you for that opportunity. Some people might not be familiar with Fortune Brands. So we are a company that is a brand that probably not a lot of people know. And we are a conglomerate of businesses in the home space. Actually, Fortune Brands has gone through many iterations. At some point we had Titleist golf balls, and we had Beam Spirits, and over time has evolved, and now it's really a home equipment company. Within Fortune Brands, we have what used to be Moen, which is a plumbing group, which actually has been renamed to the Global Plumbing Group because now we have a set of brands that give us access to some other markets that we didn't have access before. So within the plumbing group in Moen, I'm the VP of Innovation. I'm part of the Chief Marketing and Innovation Office. And my goal is to enable the organization to be innovative. And I see my role many times as a behind the scenes guy that is just making this happen, even though I also have responsibility to infusing some of the, the new ideas and advancing those ideas into the funnel. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that's it. I've been here for just over 3 years and have enjoyed it quite a lot until now.
Yeah, so, I think it seems like it's a newer title. I think, organizations have been using innovation forever, but I don't know that they've always been calling it or had a dedicated group of resources to innovation in their organizations. But could you just tell us a little bit about sort of your like, what was that journey and what were some of the key roles that you've held in your career journey that became, led you to become interested in the skill sets you've used to lead innovation teams and innovation at organizations?
Yeah, it's a relatively new function in many companies. I think one of the pioneers was Whirlpool that had a first-time innovation lead, and that's in less than 20 years. But really, people come from different angles in different functions to innovation roles. But I think on the personal side, has been a journey that obviously I never anticipated. I started my career as an architect, actually back in Mexico City, where I'm from, which is basically a design career. You're understanding consumer needs and understanding how to translate those into a real object where people are going to live. Then, my interests and connections in career path took me to do a master's in computer science. And that shifted my career to working for IBM in consulting services for a number of years. And then I did another shift, which was to study an MBA, a business degree, when I came to the US, and I went to Purdue University, where my daughter is going right now. It's funny, 20 years later. And after that, I joined Whirlpool, and my goal at the time was to be a general manager in the business. And I was going through my checklist of all the roles that I had to do that everyone advised me to do. Oh, you got to do sales, you got to do merchandising, you got to do all these different roles so you can be a good general manager. And I found myself in that process a little frustrated at some point, because I remember being in sales and always going through every Monday, the SNOP meetings and people asking me, well, how are you going to increase your numbers? How are you going to get more product out there lower? And my reflection at the time was, well, I cannot create more demand. The only way to create more demand is if I create something that people really, really want. And that was kind of like the spark that drove that desire. And at that time, Whirlpool was going through this big transformation. So I went in and got myself trained into the process, became an innovation mentor that we had a program at the time. And, little by little, I just migrated into that in a full-time capacity. And I run that role, the Global Innovation Director, for several years. And then I made a commitment to that career and this path and really become an innovation expert. So that led me to a very different industry like insurance with Allstate, and now with Moen. So that's a little bit of the journey. And I think as it's inherent in innovation has also been a very transformative journey. I've been touching many different roles in the industries.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Exciting. And I think it's really interesting about, sort of touching different parts of a business, because I honestly do believe those are foundational building blocks that allow you to be innovative. And so the question I'm going to get to is we all want to be innovative in our organizations, especially when, you're in a leadership role. You might be a visionary leader that has a lot of big ideas, but those big ideas go nowhere if there's no framework or process for getting something from that idea stage or increasing numbers. How are you going to do that? Let's use some innovation around getting more market share, getting more customers. So can you step us through, you've sort of used frameworks in your career. You've got a newer framework that you've been leveraging, the IVF framework. Can you step us through sort of the process of innovation? It's not just creativity, but what is what is the formula you're using now?
Well, at this point, I'm going to focus just on the process of, generating ideas, concepts, and bringing them into market. I think we can, at some point, take a step back and think about how do you bring this into companies. But in terms of processes, a lot of what we hear today is design thinking, and you should be bringing design thinking, and that's for sure a very important aspect of this, but it's not innovation necessarily. Really, when you think about the innovation process, you really have to start with a business imperative, whatever that is, that your strategy is dictating, and that allows you to frame, what a project might look like. So basically, there's actually a very intense effort to go through that idea of framing a problem, and really that is going to really lead you to conduct the following steps in a much more effective way. I'll talk a little bit about the origin of this framework here in a second. So once you have that framing, is the idea of breaking frames and building new perspectives, and we call it discover. And that's when really design thinking starts kicking in terms of, understanding consumer behavior, but many times not only about consumer behavior, it's also about dynamics of the industry, comparative insights that you might generate, or what you can learn from other industries. Once you synthesize those insights into after the discovery, you really have this creative process of generating ideas that then get refined, conceptualized, and moved into an elaboration process of creating a business case around them, and really defining what can that deliver for the organization in the context that you intended to. And and I like to point launch as another important aspect, because it's not only about the marketing aspects of this, especially when you're dealing with innovation. There's really all the work that you have to do after that to really understand if your insights were accurate, and then how consumers are receiving these, so you can make adjustments. The framework that you're seeing, it's what we call the Unifying Innovation Method. And the genesis of this came from a program we started with the University of Notre Dame with, at the time with Whirlpool. And, when we were there, a lot of people came and asked us about what process did we use. And, there are thousands of companies out there that claim to have their own innovation process, their unique way to generate ideas. And that's very confusing for innovation leaders, because, well, should I go and use the this model or the idea model, or I heard design thinking, but I also have heard lean startup, and what should we be using? And our intent with this framework was to synthesize all of those processes into the steps that really are meaningful and that you should leverage to conduct innovation. And the idea of this is that then you can adapt that to your own organization. So that's just to give you a little bit of background on what that came from.
Yeah, I agree. And you said it's pretty open source. You're letting other organizations just adapt your framework and adjust your framework. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
So can we dive a little bit deeper? Because I love this. I am a true believer in having to leverage a process to actually get anything from an idea all the way to into market, test it. But can you give us a couple of examples, whether it's from your current work or something maybe that you did at one of your prior roles, so we can sort of see what the business challenge was, and then how you kind of use this process to solve that business challenge and some of the results.
Yeah, certainly. There are many examples I could refer to right now. I cannot get into too much depth on the Moen side. I probably can highlight a couple of items there. But if I go back into some of the examples that have been in the market for a little bit of a longer time, I can point to an example on the KitchenAid brand. At the time, we're looking to really grow that very, very strong brand into consumers' homes on the what we call portable side, basically appliances you can bring to the countertop. One of the items in the flagship products was a stand mixer. It continues to be really, a lot of people actually in other countries call KitchenAid the stand mixer, or bring my KitchenAid, and they're referring to the stand mixer. And as we went through the process of discovery, we realized how much equity it had, but also what we call orthodoxy or paradigm, that it had to be very big to be something that brought all that equity of the brand into the product. And we used some comparables and got inspiration from analogs. I think one of the analogs that we looked at was BMW and the Mini, and how the Mini can be a very premium product in a very small footprint. You don't have to have something that is very luxurious at larger scale. And that was the genesis of the Mini stand mixer, and really bringing all that premium equity into a smaller footprint for consumers that might be falling into that segment, but that wouldn't buy it because they probably live in a smaller apartment. So think about New York, Chicago, very small apartment, very small kitchen, they will not, take 50% of their countertop for that. So that will open that. So that was another one of the insights that drove that launch. If I now go into Moen, for example, one of the things that is important is just what is the genesis and what is the real aspiration of the brand. And in Moen, we've been evolving the brand from being a plumbing brand, which has been known for faucets and shower heads, to being a water brand. And that evolution came through really a reposition of the brand when we realized that the real equity that the brand had was with much older generations. So if you ask any boomer about Moen, they will know it, trust in it, name it. But if you ask younger generations, they will probably not recognize the name or maybe confuse it. So as we started to dig a little deeper, what we learned was that they really wanted a brand that could stand for something more than just this faucet. And that led to this new positioning, moving the brand from a durability and style brand. You might remember the slogan, buy it for looks, buy it for life, to what we call a hero for water. And basically any water experience in your home, we're going and trying to get and solve for it. So that was actually something that happened prior to me arriving here. We have a very amazing CMO that brought all that vision into the brand. Now my task was, how does that positioning turn into a product strategy? So we defined what we call strategic areas of focus, or you might call them domains in other contexts. An example of that, is peace of mind. With water, we want peace of mind. And you can think of something that actually relates to my previous job with the insurance company, where water can be great, but it can also be very damaging. If you're not home and a pipe burst, your basement is going to be, a disaster. So that opened up this opportunity for us. We're a water brand, so we can also protect you. And that led to this partnership with Flow, which is the best water protection system in the market. Now they're part of our brand, and we're actually expanding that into other areas. So that just tells you a little bit about how do you take that business imperative and mission of the brand into something very practical that you can bring into the market.
Yeah, so just sort of to kind of backtrack on that a little bit as well, it sounds like, using that framework, you could really identify maybe where you've had a barrier in your organization to growth, or, you tapped a certain market out. And then how do you think about, how do we change, the game, or how do we go in a different direction to gain some more market share through the use of this innovation thinking? But you're really using the customer experience to sort of drive, the practical application of the business direction around that innovation. So it sounds very sexy, but there's real data and strategy and use cases around, why it's truly going to, become an innovation in the organization's sort of revenue model and brand. So I love that example. So kind of going, to that next phase, we talked about this in the, in sort of the tee up, is that there's certain things that organizations just completely miss, or there's certain pitfalls that they fall into when they're thinking about sort of that nuance of innovation in their organization. Can you talk to us a little bit about what, are some of those challenges, or what you've bumped up against that have stopped the potential innovation strategy, or the potential of?
Yeah, I think innovation can be a flavor of the month, and that's one of the pitfalls that I think exist. It's interesting if you think about innovation. When a new leader steps into a company, he or she will never ask, "Oh, do we need a marketing department, or do we need a finance department?" But innovation is always, well, do we need one, or should we be different, or are we getting what we need? And I think that innovation function hasn't matured enough in the market to really be a constant throughout the companies. But I think one of the key pitfalls that I find is that innovation is not ideation. A lot of people say, well, let's be innovative. Let's have an innovation session. Let me call a friend that has done this in the past and have him do an innovation session. There's a lot that happens before that and a lot happens after that. And also, I think it's important to know that innovation is not necessarily defining the strategy. It can help you define the strategy. It can help you inform it. But strategy comes first. And then you design innovation to deliver against the strategy. Another common pitfall, I think, is just the tension that exists on driving the core versus expanding. And having the right mechanisms to manage that tension, it's difficult. And you require really a robust process. And again, back to the strategy, a transformational strategy, an objective that forces those decisions, because it's going to be very difficult when you start to talk about real resources. And I think another common thing I've seen over the years, maybe not in the roles I've been, but through my teachings, is that many times, innovation is seen as, well, we got to do it, but let me just bring one, top employee and they'll figure it out. And I think, right now we have enough experience in the market to really, if you really want to be serious about it, resource it appropriately, bring the right skill set, and don't expect, the high potential new MBA that is going to solve it. Nothing against, great talent. I think it can be developed, but I think, that's a common mistake that I've seen, that, you have that and then you go through churns, and then frustrations that don't allow you to get to the desired state. So those are some of the common things I've observed over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I think, just to kind of recap strategy, so really thinking through why you're even trying to solve the problem. And then, we've learned this lesson the hard way too, just that resource planning around what's it really going to take to pull something new off. And is it going to be an add-on to our core offering, or are we going to have to really carve out some time on, a special team to actually, make something happen, versus trying to think you're going to be able to do all with just this finite group of resources. And, can you talk a little bit about experimentation too? There is some need to sort of test some things. And I saw that, in your process. Can you talk a little bit about, is there anything that around that testing and looking at success, failure that you've learned in your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best analogy to this that a lot of companies have adopted is the lean startup, and basically that comes from software, just bringing prototypes into the market and having people tell you what they think. I can't remember who I heard this phrase from. One of the many teachers I've had in innovation, that is not the same to see what consumers do versus what they say. Every time you bring someone and act on the product, whether it's a product and how they're using it, even all the way until how they're purchasing it, it has a big effect in your ability to be successful. And I think with innovation, especially when you're going into markets that don't exist, and maybe product categories that you are creating, there's no way to predict through any consumer research. So you really have to be testing it there. And in software, it's much easier to do that. In apps, because you put one round, you have people react to it. It's much harder in hard goods, in the ones that require long lead times, required to build machinery or equipment to build it. So the best thing you can do is just, as soon as you can, bring things and show them to consumers and get that feedback back to adjust your go-to-market strategies. So those are some of the key learnings. And I think a lot of us go through a lot of growing pains, because once you get enamored with an innovation and get an organization behind it, nobody wants to question it. And that's, I think, one of the things that as innovation leader, you have to manage that tension. But it's not easy, because at some point you might look like a contrarian, and that doesn't help anybody's career. You have to be able to manage that. Okay, to what extent do I have to get to that point?
So Moisés, that actually, I have a great question from the audience as you were speaking on that. So can you talk more, like when you say managing the tension, are there any mechanisms? Are there things that you look at from why you expand resources? Like what are some things you've put in place that have helped you keep control of that?
Well, the company is a little bit different, so it's going to be hard to generalize. But okay. I think at the core is really aligning your innovation strategy to the strategic planning process. And this is a process that goes throughout the year. And innovation has to be part of that. If it's not part of that, then you're managing it to the side, and you're not going to have those tough discussions. In the case of Moen, we have established 3 meetings in the year that serve as these key milestones. And you have all the right players there to make a lot of the resource decisions. In our 2 meetings, one comes right after profit plan. It's our 3-year product roadmap. And at that point, everything converges and say, well, we have so many resources in all these product plans. How is all these going to play? And let's have those discussions. Then there's another meeting like that, a 3-year product plan towards the end of the year, where we contrast back what we looked at the beginning. And has anything changed? And we'll have to make adjustments. Then we have another meeting in between those 2. That is like a 3+ year innovation roadmap. And I love that meeting because it gives you the opportunity to explore without constraints and without the tension of having to decide now what resources to put against them, but creates a lot of inspiration. And what we found is that forum sometimes forces organization to make other decisions and say, hey, let's take that and bring it in forward, because it seems like it may have more potential than others. But all of these 3 meetings that I mentioned are in the context of that strategic plan. So it's not on the side, it's not ad hoc, it's part of our process. And for me, that's the big difference. Innovation should be part of your planning, your business planning.
Well, to that point, when you're talking about innovation, is this something that is really only realistic for larger organizations? It feels like it's such a startup mentality innovation, but a 3-year roadmap, that seems undoable for some mid-cap organizations. How do you sort of take that same application of maybe those 3 touchstones, the business strategy piece, that mid-year plan, and then the look back? How do you look at that when you're trying to do something faster than maybe a 3-year roadmap?
No, I think the main difference is that when you're in a larger company, you're managing more complexity and larger portfolios, and there are much more voices. If I take one of those and think about one smaller company, even all the way to startup, I think the key is, what do we stand for, and how are we going to deliver something that allows us to deliver that promise to the market and to the consumer? And I think then, the process that we've described in terms of, the steps to get there is valid, but you just do it in a leaner way. But I think the smaller you are, I think the more incremental steps you have to take to get there, and be more mindful about your resources as you come to market.
Thank you. Well, Lisa, is there anything that we missed in the Q&A around this particular question? Because then I was going to sort of step into some, more general questions about building innovation teams and skill sets.
I think that's actually, we've got a few great questions on that skill set. So I'll hold those, Kathy, for your questions. We'll tack them on. But I do have one question. So first, I'm supposed to tell you hi from Janet. That was in our option, Moisés. And wondering, is there one innovation that you're able to speak about that you're most proud about in your career? And if so, what is it?
It's hard, and to be frank, I'm going to refer to that. One of the things that I'm most proud of in terms of my innovation career has been my ability to work with teams and see how that process enables many, many people throughout geographies, throughout markets, throughout channels and categories. I love the example I gave you on KitchenAid. That's one I was very close to. Earlier in my career at Whirlpool, it was great when I saw, some project I took from beginning to end in the plant, just factories, just building and bending metal. But I think from an innovation standpoint, just that proliferation of my my work and seeing it, just touch one manager and that touched another person, that has been the most rewarding part for me.
That's wonderful. And then lastly, before we get into more of those questions, a question from Karen, and I'm going to find hers. Have you seen any differences or big differences or maybe nuances when you're applying the unifying innovation methodology on a service-based company like an Allstate versus a product-focused company like Fortune and Moen?
I think the process in the framework applies to both. When it comes to how you frame, generate insights and so forth, I think one of the main differences is just when you are getting close to market and how do you actually do prototyping and testing. Because in a service company, you have to actually create that and have people experience it, as opposed to the type of market research you do in a durables product company. And that's really very different in how you approach the market. Now, what's interesting is that one is merging with the other, but not the other way, if that makes sense. For example, in the case of service companies, few of those are incorporating hardware. In the case of us, we're now really also incorporating a lot of service elements. So a lot of that for me, it's merging, because now we have apps, we have durables, we have subscriptions, and all of that kind of is interrelated. I think the other piece that is very different is just the mentality and the mindset of the people around in the business. Here in companies like Moen or Whirlpool, actually they're very similar. It's an engineering mindset, but primarily in a sales mindset, versus a service company, at least in the case of Allstate, which is more like an actuarial mindset. And it's a little bit harder to kind of break through, and talk through consumer insights and a little less quantitative aspects of what you can measure through an actuarial model.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so in thinking about sort of creating an innovation team or hiring for an innovation role in your organization, even though we've already clarified that it's just not like one random rock star, that you really do need to have cross-functional teams involved in innovation projects. What would be some of the things that you'd recommend for an organization to get started? Or is there like good framework that exists in most companies, like marketing departments and other areas where they're doing innovation type work and kind of framing those groups in sort of setting up that innovation strategy team?
I think I'll go back a little bit to what you need to accomplish. So that composition is going to vary to whatever the maturity stage is. But I think the three core elements that I see in any innovation team are, the business savviness that is really about, marketing, and many times it's filled with someone like a management consulting type of person or a strong business person, and really being able to assess markets, size opportunities, and translate insights into business cases. I think there's another element that is, the design thinking aspect, the creativity that comes with it, the market research. Many times that's either filled with a designer or with a market researcher, depending on the type of company. If you think about the archetypes of those, there are very different type of people in everything. And then the third one is technology, and there's usually a big element of technology, whether it is, IT, IoT, data science, or mechanical engineering, like we do here. And I think the ideal candidate to kind of lead a team that has a composition like that is someone that can navigate in those three areas. Maybe not being an expert on either one of those, but again, depending on the type of company, one might predominate, and that's something that I've seen very commonly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because, you know, if you are going to put a product out, you definitely need somebody that's got that product development experience. And so, Lisa, I know we've gotten a few other questions around this question. So do you want to
Yes.
make sure we get our pen?
Definitely. So let me first go up to, I'm going to find Diane's question here. So give me one moment. So first, I'm also supposed to tell you hi from Diane Stover Hopkins Moises, who's watching today.
Hello,
So
Diane.
Diane says, great to see the IVIA mentor methodology. She really enjoyed working with you on that certification program.
Yeah, she's one of the conspirators of that, yeah.
So her question for you is, wondering now that you've launched this innovation process to new companies, what have you found to be the most effective way to launch a new innovation tool with a low innovation culture? And that actually pairs up to, we had a few other questions. I believe Antonio had a question as well, very similar on how to embed culture, embed innovation in a traditional culture that kind of puts it off to the side. It's a secondary piece, especially now with the pandemic. So few cultural questions for you to tackle there.
What I found effective, at least, in my experience, has been really adapting the process and the framework to the organizational culture and already existing processes that are very ingrained. We did that at Whirlpool for years, and it took a long time, and there were always debates and tensions. Basically, what we've done here is really map it to mirror somewhat our product development process. The projects that are more complex and that have this higher level of ambiguity are driven through this design thinking process. But we're using similar terminology. So basically, the point being that you're adapting a little bit to the existing culture, but through that, you're starting to uncover some of the cultural issues that prevent you from being effective. And for me, it's more effective to have those emerge from that, as opposed to saying this is what you have to do. So, for example, if you think about our product development process, typically, in the stage gates, all the questions are about return, or maybe what the technology readiness that you might have. And at least in a culture that was primarily engineering driven and sales driven. And if you start injecting the point of view of consumer insights and what led you to that decision, what is the most important insight you have, that emerges through that, and then you realize, okay, we really have to bump our consumer understanding. So for me, that has been the way, and it's really about building alliances and making everyone be part of innovation. So we didn't talk much about that, but one of the, I think, biggest drivers for the success we've had today at Moen, which we're not done, and I don't think will ever be done. I'm proud of what we've done, but we have much more to do. But I think one of the things that has really allowed us to do that is that we were purposely defining what innovation meant, and we said innovation is not a department, is a mindset for the organization. And every time I do a presentation or go into these meetings, I put out that slide and say, it's not about my team, it's about our mindset. And that has been something that has been allowing us to really embed this. And now you see that pride in people that get involved. The more we go through these cycles, the more engagement you create.
I love that. And don't forget, you need caffeine for innovation, that one secret ingredient.
Yeah.
It is truly a mindset, because it is not going to get to the finish line with just one individual or just one group of individuals or in any organization of any size. So Lisa, is there anything else? Because I know there was a lot of great questions around.
So Mike actually had asked to rate Moises when you were answering your question on culture of innovation. He had one, but I hope we were able to answer that too. Next one, to shift over a little bit to the tech side, since of course we are doing our webinar all virtual today from our own places. So Michael was wondering, over the years, how has the use of technology evolved or helped mature the tracking, driving, and revisiting of innovations and your insights process?
I think what has evolved a lot, and for the good is our ability to be faster in getting consumer feedback. You know, right now, the social media tools, you know, technology allows you to get into somebody's home, get reactions, at least some reads even in days or sometimes in hours. So that has really changed. I think similarly, you can you know, set up a website in no time, and that gives you, you know, the ability to start reading a consumer's perception about a product that you might have. So for me, all of that has changed. What hasn't changed, I think, is, you know, the complexity of managing data points. And, you know, at some point, actually, many years ago, one of the hype words was content management. You know, I don't think that solution has even realized to the potential. So all of that today is done through searches and so forth. So for me, that people glue is still not solved for. Like sometimes you have a great market research person, and when that person leaves, you know, there are a bunch of files out there, and we'll never go back and pick them up. So I think that's still potentially an issue in organizations.
Yeah. So what else kind of on that line of emerging or thinking about, you know, technology, what other things are sort of on the forefront? What are you seeing emerging in the field of innovation? Is there anything that stands out? What should we be looking for in the future?
I think the power of data that you can gather through, you know, your previous launches, through your market research, it can really be pointing you to the right answers over time in a much more certain way. So I think that's an aspect of market research and innovation that is really evolving as you generate more data and have products that actually have the capability to do that. So if you take as an example the product that I mentioned, Flow by Moen, where we're, you know, monitoring water consumption. Just imagine the amount of data we get from people about, you know, how they use water, when they use it, and all of that brought back into the process, you know, reveals all kinds of insights. Or you think about our digital shower, and, you know, we now know the temperature of showers in different geographies. We know that how that might differ from consumer profiles. So really the world of data and data science really brings a new dimension to innovation, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's another question on that same thing. That first question was from Antonio. I hope we got that clarified for you. But there's another question with COVID from Julie. With COVID and the changes in marketing and capturing real-time data, are you finding yourself moving into newer innovations in marketing metrics? I'm guessing like geo cookies and geo fencing. And have you got any feelings about the pros and cons of those newer technologies?
You know, I'm not sure if they're asking about our actual innovation focus or about the process. Do you get a sense? I just want to make sure that I answered the question the right way.
I guess it's in gathering the insights. So some of the technology that you're using in insights gathering. Or real
yeah, you know, for us, yeah, hasn't. I mean, we've been at this for like what, 6 months. I think some things have changed. We're going to consumers in digital means, but we really haven't really transformed that at least in the last you know, few months. I will say that we're relying more on these technologies, and we're realizing that we can accomplish almost the same through digital means as opposed to having a focus group where we bring people in. But maybe I may be disappointing the person who asked this question, but we really haven't found anything transformational, at least in the way we approach innovation these months, other than using these digital tools to extract insights.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like it's still, you know, still pretty emerging in terms of there's so many analytics tools available to us from a marketing standpoint, and it's you know, I think it's still really, really early to sort of isolate a couple of things, but I think that's a great question that we're all going to be looking at, that review data, that consumer behavior data, and with the more smart technologies that are in our homes, you know, for your organization, you're going to be able to both look at the macro impact as well as individual utilization. So that sort of brings me to just thinking about, we talked a bit about building teams and the disciplines needed, but is there certain cultural or certain skill sets that are transcend regardless of your title being a marketing or engineer? Is there certain skill sets that really help bring the right group of people in place, and what do you look for when you're sort of building those alliances across cross-functional teams?
I think the real trait to any person that wants to talk or to work in innovation is really being curious. In any dimension that you can think of. One thing that I found interesting in my innovation roles is that you are kind of stuck in between leadership teams, because usually this gets a lot of visibility and really aligning to strategies and being business focused and really using the right language to influence a group, like it can be the executive committee or even a board, and then working with teams that require and need a spark of creativity and the infusion of goofiness sometimes to really relax and be able to do innovation, because innovation has to be fun, and that's when best ideas come into play, when people get inspired. And I think living in that juncture is not that easy. So I think that's one thing that I found unique, and I think a lot of people that have been in innovation roles have been successful have a little bit of that ability to live in those two worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's usually a financial implication. So the more your team could maybe have understanding of those financial pieces and what the potential is, and getting excited around creating that new market potential or new revenue potential, I would assume that could be a great motivator. Also helps you report up some of the right data points that the C-suite wants to hear about how things are tracking. And then lastly, one of the other deliverables that we were hoping to talk about is that leadership. What vision do we have to put in place, and how how does it both enhance the process of innovation, but also how does it not kill the creative process? So what are some of the things that you need to sort of think about as the leader of an innovation project or an innovation team, or just helping with innovation in your organization?
Yeah. I think for me, number one is leading with purpose. For me, really that why are we doing this? It's what matters the most. And I think when you address that, people really get rally behind. But I think there's also, and obviously there are leadership styles, and I think that's going to vary. I think it's also for leaders in organizations important to recognize the tension that exists between speed and risk, and being able to be comfortable with that. Because it's very important to be fast, but many times being fast it causes issues, and you just gotta be able to make those calls and know that when you are aiming high and trying to accomplish a lot, there are going to be pitfalls, and make sure that you as leaders are able to recognize those and move on, and solve it together, not point fingers and move on, because if that was a choice done for a reason, that was part of the goal, and sometimes might be more important to be faster than right. And if you make that choice, then take the learnings and keep going. So we talk a lot about celebrate failure, but I think a more practical and real way of learning is, or doing that is, okay, if I had issues, what did we learn? And let's celebrate by going to the next project and not penalizing anybody.
Yeah, well, so my takeaways were, setting that purpose, that why, so that everybody both on the leadership team as well as the individuals working on an innovation project really understand that higher purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. And then, setting realistic expectations. I know because I'm always wanting things done faster, and I always expect it to be a lot easier. So it is a challenging balance to strike that right balance between speed and getting something, getting enough information, validation, to know something's going to be successful. So I will take that as something I have to work on to get a little bit more comfortable with the time it takes to do things. So, but yeah, thank you for that. Lisa, let's open it up. We're, a little bit over on time. I want to make sure we get anybody else's questions answered before we go into the break.
Anyone has any questions, feel free to use that Q&A option or the Zoom webinar. I should mention while we're waiting for final questions, Moisés, I did get a note from Antonio that to send the best from the Amatris team. I'm probably saying that incorrectly. We're working together to use the methodology in Latin America, doing it 100% digital. So for those of you listening in, it is possible to use the innovation process on a digital format as well. Let's see, Mike had a question and we'll round out with this one. When you're brainstorming, are there ever any bad ideas?
Of course there are, but we never discourage them. And when you are brainstorming, really one of the rules is there are no bad ideas. Sometimes actually we have one technique that one of my colleagues introduced, and it was, give me your worst idea ever. And we take that idea and then we say, well, now the next person improve it a little bit, and then the next one improve it a little bit, and you turn that into a great idea. So that's why I think that that notion of there are no bad ideas is true.
I love it.
I like that process too.
We love sort of the fun ideas because then, it gets everybody laughing and at ease, and then you can really have some of those breakthrough discussions when the funny things get out.
Yeah.
Well, we'll go ahead and round out today's set. Oh, I did see one more sneak in. Okay, Antonio will answer your question. All right, so how do we handle hierarchical organizations in order to make them permeable to the innovation mindset? So if you've got a very structured piece, and have you done anything personally to help break that mold that you could share with the audience today?
So I think for me, the key to that is really having a champion in a leadership position. And, it can be at different levels, but I've found that bottoms-up innovation is very, very hard. It has to have a champion, especially the larger the organization you get to, more it has to be really a driven initiative tied to the real goals of the company. So for me, influencing through that, it's a great way to do it. And I always like to think of these as finding the right wave. So think that you're a surfer, and it's going to be very hard to be pedaling. But if you're just watching and then you find a big wave and you're able to ride that, it's going to propel you for a little while. And I think in innovation, you have to be looking for those and preparing for just to get the big ones. And that's really what starts helping you just get momentum.
Well, thank you so much. This time went so quickly. I have so many more questions. This is something I think all businesses really need to be thinking about hard right now. We've got so many challenges between economics and a pandemic that we do need to be thinking about how to break through. So thank you so much for sharing some methodology and some things to avoid in really rethinking how we go to market in the rest of 2020 and beyond.
So if you do have another question from Moisés, feel free to reach out to him. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to connect with our audience, and it sounds like some great fans of your work as well. So we do have his email on the screen. You can also connect with him on LinkedIn and stay tuned for the different innovation insights that I know he shares through his profile. So Moisés, thank you from myself, and I know Kathy said thank you, but so wonderful to have you today, and I agree. The time this last hour has flown by. So thank you to our audience for staying with us a little over time, but so many great questions to answer today.
Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thanks for the invitation.
As we continue on, stay tuned for our next Business as Unusual webinar, which is on September 10th. We'll be featuring Mary Lynn Fayomi, the president and CEO of HR Source, and we're going to be really continuing on this agility and innovation track that we've been on for our last few sessions. Mary Lynn is going to dig in, and we're going to cover everything from blocking and tackling right now, so dealing with the current issues that our pandemic, the social unrest, and the economic issues have caused, all the way into thinking through how to reimagine your 2021. So what does the next 30 days bring, and where can you go next year? So we're going to take care of a little bit of, we'll say, present and future, but really continuing on that. How do you use that agile mindset? How can you pull in some thoughts of innovation like Moisés shared today, and how can you push that into next year? So stay tuned. You can go ahead and go to redcaffeine.com to register for the September 10th session. We'll also be following up with a note in Moisés's recap email today. And for one of you that asked, yes, we will be sharing that slide as well as the recording so that you can share this message as well as some of the information with your team and your colleagues. This was your first Business as Unusual webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to having you on our future sessions. If you've never heard of Red Caffeine and would like to learn more, feel free to reach out to us at connect@redcaffeine.com.